Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and as you've probably seen in some previous videos, and maybe you can see over here on the side, I have a bunch of stems that are pretty overgrown and need some trimming. So what I want to do is a short video on trimming stems, specifically for a couple of different type of leaves that we can apply to nearly every stem plant out there with very, very few exceptions. So, with that being said, let's get into both Fallen Forest and Running River over here and do some trim work. So we're over here at the Running River tank, and you're going to see we have two different stems, and we have some old pots we need to get rid of for some boost that's in there. This is when you know you're really behind on your maintenance. So first, you can see we have a bunch of this bacopa here, and what you might not see, but I'm actually going to uproot one of these stems. This is like one super stem. Awesome. So you can see this lower portion here has almost no foliage. So usually, when I have a stem like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this. Even though I've got good root structure down here, and I've got one little baby, I'll save this baby here, but I'll get rid of all this excess stem because it's not helping us. And then we'll trim off the rest of the bacopa. Sometimes it's fragile enough to break like that. Sometimes you need to trim it. Because of bacopa's structure, right, it's not super dense or thick, we can even pinch this potentially with our fingernails or break it with our hands and be just fine. Now you see how I have this bit of stem right here, right? What I want to do, I'm going to use my shears for this, but we'll chop this bit off here and here. And although that little bit looks weird, this is perfectly fine to replant. Now in my case, I'm going to float it, and I'm going to let it, by floating, I'm going to wait till I get just the start of some roots here before I replant it. Then in this case, you can see some aerial roots right here. What I want to do is just trim this bottom. So you see these leaves here aren't very healthy. So what I'm going to do is trim this off. And then I want to keep these aerial roots because these will establish fresh roots that are still acclimated. And then from this cut point, we're going to trigger it. The cut will trigger this to grow new roots as well. But this will make a nice, healthy base to replant this bit of bacopa. And then, eventually it's going to grow roots like this, these nice, long white roots here, right? But all this excess stem we really don't need. And similarly, we have this little baby right here, but it's got some roots. So what we're just going to do is chop it off kind of like that. And that leaves us a nice piece to plant directly into our substrate. So we'll set that there. I'll finish trimming that later, but I want to show you something else with this Mariophyllum here. So again, you can see we've got areas with no foliage. This is stuff we're going to get rid of. But this more fine leaf, I don't know how well you see it underwater, like over here. Probably not very well, because of the glare. But if we bring it up here, right, these finer leafed plants you need to treat kind of similar, but really what we want is we want to trim it up so it's not so long. These have grown very, very long. So I'll use this piece here. This would potentially even be quite tall, right? So what I want to do, so I'm going to fluff these out so you can see them better, is I'm looking for right at the top of a set of leaves. You see that right where that little crown is? So I'm going to trim right there. And you can see on this trim piece, this is our basically waste. And then in this, with our leftovers here, what we can do is one of two things. We can either plant this right away, and it should do fine, or we can let it float, right, and wait until we see some root growth happen. There's a decent amount of flow here, and this stuff's been kind of floating as is, so I'm just going to let it float, and then once I have roots, what I'm going to do is peel off some of this lower foliage just to kind of bare the stem some. About this much. You can see how little that is in comparison, right? But that just gives me space to plant it into the substrate without a bunch of extra kind of foliage messing with it. That's going to matter more for your larger leaf plants like our bacopa here. But even on these fine leaf myriophyllums, it matters. So, I'm going to finish doing my trimming work here, and then we're going to move over. What you kind of don't see is that there's foliage growing all the way out of the tank, but we showed this recently in a video. And yeah, we got a little bit of algae. It's pretty easy, we just pick it off as we work. String algae like this can be a pain, but don't let them stress you out. It's a slow process to fight them back and get them minimized. And one of the best ways to do that process is manual removal. So when we're dealing with stems like this, one thing that's really good is we have something very similar here, right? Big, obvious foliage makes the cuts really easy. But if you'll notice here, we have a very thick stem. So unlike the bacopa and some of the other stems we've been messing with, get that snail out of there, we don't want to try and break this by hand. We definitely want to use our pair of scissors. Now in this case, because some of the foliage has been growing out of the water, we're probably going to cause some amount of melt when it comes back in. You can even see like some of these leaves here have been getting burnt. And burnt is in quotation marks, but they're just getting the wrong amount of light and they don't like that. But that's okay. We've got so much foliage that we can probably trim some of this and get rid of it and be okay. So you'll notice you also have, off this big stem, you have these little stems here. These are great as plants to get extra density, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to come in and trim those little ones off. And in these cases, because they're younger, they have a thinner stem, it's actually fairly easy to break them by hand, you can see. So what we're going to go through and do is, especially if we have these aerial roots, you can see that right there, right? Get some extra light, but you can kind of see it just hanging out in the water. These are great. They're basically ready to plant right away. Now what we need to do is thin this out. So in a case of something like this, where this is a super long stem, what I'm going to try and target is not necessarily as short as this one here in my fingers. I'll let this float for a bit, but say, again, we have lots of aerial roots, which is really good for reestablishing this plant. We're going to the top of the leaves. We trim. And yeah, we're going to pull some algae, but that's okay. We can just remove that algae manually. And now what we're looking at is a much shorter stem overall, but still in comparison to this tank, if you look, right? This stem still takes up a good amount of the tank. So we can actually take, you see these nice, healthy aerial roots? We're going to turn this into our fresh root system. So what I'm going to do is go through and about this far on this stem, I'm going to remove all the leaves below that. And I'm going to bury this stem all the way down about that much. So it becomes shorter naturally. It'll trim this back up, right? But more importantly, we have a nice, strong root system that's going to be down in our substrate right away to help this plant reestablish itself after the trim. So I'm going to get to work, and then we'll wrap this up. All right. So there's our trimming. You can kind of see, I know the glare makes it hard. I'm not trying to show off, but basically I super trimmed everything down low.
I have a ton of excess plant matter that I just tossed in my bin because I don't have a club event or anything relatively soon where I would sell those excess spares. But I had enough where I could actually replace some of the planting on this side of the tank here. Because remember, the stems are on the far side normally, those limnophilas. And we used to have a little bit of Pogostamen erectus on this side, but it was struggling. So instead I brought the limnophila over here. Because it's a much broader leaf, it's going to do a little better. I'm floating almost all the trims in here. And there's a few more I have to finish, but yeah, I can do that through the rest of the weekend. What I really wanted to focus on is simple technique, kind of my approach to trimming stems, because you guys have seen most of my tanks. I let my stems grow quite a bit for a while before I do trims, and then I take fairly aggressive trims. But what I'm trying to do is get the youngest, healthiest plants, and especially if I have those aerial roots, they make it so much easier for after a trim for a plant to be planted in, establish itself quickly, and become healthy and amazing fast. And that's the biggest thing with some of my techniques is making sure that when you're replanting or when you're adding to get density, or maybe you're moving one plant to another tank so you can have that plant in 2 different tanks, is using techniques that make that process significantly easier where you have minimal risk of having problems with your plants. So, if you've learned something from this video, let me know in the comments down below if you enjoyed it. Please give it a like. Maybe share this out to some of your friends. It's the easiest way to help out your fellow friendly fish fan, fish tuber. It's the easiest way, and it's absolutely free. If you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. Maybe even ring that little notification bell so that you can get all of my tips and trick videos, product reviews, new tanks that are getting set up soon. There's a tank that's about to go right here this weekend, and another tank over there that's getting set up very soon. I'm going to do another aquascape with my wife, just like how we did Fallen Forest together. So look forward to all of those. They're coming very, very soon. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.